kind of had to slug through some tar a little bit early to find ourselves in the second. But in the second half, we shot 66% from the floor, 50% from the three-point line, and 6 for 6 from the free throw line. See? 29 and 10.
Yeah! Caitlin Clark, the real MVP. Not just of the Indiana Fever, of the entire league. Caitlin Clark, the GOAT, the real motherfucking MVP, put on a show versus Paige Bueckers and the Dallas Wings.
Game 7th in the league in scoring. Here's the league's third leading scorer in Caitlin Clark. Spinning on Bueckers. They go one-on-one, and Clark wins the matchup.
10 assists means she wasn't simply trying to win the scoring battle. She was making the entire Fever offense function. And that is something that can get overlooked when everyone focuses on points. Basketball isn't only about who scores the most. It's about who can make the team better. And on Friday night, Clark did exactly that. Remember that 107-104 game? Dallas won by 3. This time, Indiana won by 11. That's a 14-point swing in the margin between the two meetings. And that tells you something about how much can change over the course of a WNBA season. The first game was a thriller that came down to the final moments. The second game became a statement from Indiana in the second half. Clark and the Fever didn't erase the first loss. They couldn't, but they answered it. And that's what great teams do. They respond. There is something else happening here. Caitlin Clark has spent much of her professional career under a microscope. Every game becomes a conversation. Every missed shot becomes a headline. Every spectacular pass becomes a viral clip. Every win becomes evidence of something. Every loss becomes another debate. But performances like this show why the conversation around her remains so intense. She can influence a game without needing to score 40. She can change the rhythm with her passing. She can stretch defenses. She can create shots that weren't there a moment earlier. And when the game becomes important, she has shown repeatedly that she wants the ball. That third quarter against Dallas was a perfect example. Indiana needed someone to take control. Clark stepped forward, and this is important. This story should not be about tearing down Paige Bueckers because Bueckers was excellent. 29 points against Indiana is not an ordinary performance. She continued to show why she is one of the league's most exciting young stars, and the Wings have built their future around her. In fact, Bueckers has already had some remarkable moments in the WNBA. So, this isn't a story about one star being finished and another taking over. It's the opposite. It's the beginning of a rivalry that could become one of the defining stories of the next several seasons. Clark Bueckers, different teams, different styles, same enormous expectations. And now they have another chapter. Think about the names involved. Caitlin Clark, Paige Bueckers, Aaliyah Boston, Eric Aunbol, and the growing collection of young stars entering the league. These matchups aren't simply individual battles. They're helping create new storylines for women's basketball.
So that tells you she dropped 20 in this game in the second half. So let's start right here. Sophie Cunningham. Let's check it out right here. The pass out to Soph. Way downtown, boom, knocked it down.
And every time Clark and Bueckers meet, fans get another opportunity to watch two elite players develop their games at the professional level. That's why these games feel different. There's history behind them. There's anticipation before them. And there's always the possibility that something unforgettable happens during them. Music. Now, let's address the headline carefully. You may see headlines online claiming that Caitlin Clark broke history or set a brand new record during this game. Those claims need to be handled carefully. What we can confidently establish from the game coverage is that Clark delivered a 29.10 assist performance while leading Indiana to a comeback victory over Dallas. So, if you're making a video about this matchup, the safest and strongest angle is not to invent a record. The real story is already exciting enough. Caitlin Clark answered Dallas. She produced when Indiana needed her, and the Fever defeated the same Wings team that had beaten them earlier in the season. That's a legitimate storyline. And honestly, you don't need to manufacture history when the actual game already gave you a great story. The biggest lesson from this game may have nothing to do with one statistic. It was the adjustment. Dallas had the advantage at halftime. Indiana could have allowed frustration to take over. Instead, the Fever came out of the locker room with a completely different level of urgency. Clark's third quarter became the turning point. Boston became more involved. Indiana's offense found rhythm. And suddenly, Dallas was chasing. That's how quickly basketball can change. A 5-point lead can disappear. A close game can become a double-digit victory. And one player getting hot can completely alter the psychological side of the matchup. That's exactly what happened for Indiana. This is the kind of win that can matter beyond one night. The Fever are trying to position themselves strongly heading toward the postseason, and wins against competitive teams can become extremely valuable for Dallas. Meanwhile, the challenge is to recover quickly. The Wings remain a talented team, and Paige Bueckers continues to be a major offensive weapon. One loss doesn't erase what Dallas has accomplished. But Indiana has now shown that the gap between these teams is not what the earlier meeting suggested. The first meeting belonged to Dallas. The rematch belonged to Indiana. And that sets up the possibility of another fascinating chapter later. Sports aren't supposed to be predictable. If Dallas had won again, everyone would be talking about Booker and the Wings having Indiana's number. Instead, Clark and the Fever flipped the script. They entered the game knowing Dallas had already beaten them. Music, they left with an 11-point victory. And Clark walked away with 29 points and 10 assists. That's the kind of response fans remember. Not because it erases the past, but because it changes the next chapter. Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers isn't just another WNBA matchup. It's becoming one of the league's most compelling young star storylines. And Friday night's game added another chapter. Paige Bueckers scored 29. Caitlin Clark scored 29. But Clark added 10 assists, exploded for 16 points in the third quarter, and helped Indiana turn a halftime deficit into a convincing 98-87 victory. The Fever didn't just win, they responded, they adjusted, and they showed that the earlier 3-point loss to Dallas wasn't the end of the story. It was simply the beginning of another chapter. And if these two teams meet again, you already know what basketball fans will be asking: who wins the next one? Because if this rivalry continues developing the way it has started, Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers could give WNBA fans plenty more unforgettable nights. And that is what makes this era of women's basketball so exciting. Music, Caitlin Clark got her revenge. Indiana got the win. And the rivalry with Paige Bueckers, it's only getting started. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Clark Update. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Today I've got another exciting and highly interesting video for you. And if you're a true Caitlin Clark fan, you're definitely going to want to watch this one until the very end. Before we get started, let me know you're part of the Clark Update Army by commenting CC 100% below. I love seeing all the amazing Clark fans in the comments. Now without wasting any more time, let's jump straight into today's video. What happens when two of the biggest stars in women's basketball meet? With everything on the line, you get a game that feels bigger than the scoreboard. Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever entered Friday night looking to make a statement against Paige Bueckers and the Dallas Wings. And after what happened earlier in the season, this matchup had an entirely different feeling. The last time these teams met, Dallas escaped with a thrilling 107-104 victory, with Bueckers scoring 20 points while Clark and the Fever came painfully close to forcing overtime. But this time, the story was completely different. The Fever turned the tables, stormed back after trailing at halftime, and finished with a 98-87 victory. And Caitlin Clark, she delivered one of the biggest performances of the night. She finished with 29 points and 10 assists, including an explosive third quarter that completely changed the momentum of the game. But there is much more to this story than just a final score. Because this wasn't simply Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers. It was a battle between two generations of basketball stars, two #1 picks, two players who have been under enormous attention since college, and two teams fighting for an important late-season win. Next voice, next voice. The Wings didn't walk into Gainbridge Fieldhouse intimidated. Despite dealing with injuries, Dallas came out ready to compete. Paige Bueckers was aggressive from the beginning, and the Wings showed exactly why they had already defeated Indiana earlier in the season. At halftime, Dallas had the advantage. The Wings led 37-35. Indiana wasn't playing badly, but Dallas had managed to control enough of the game to keep the Fever uncomfortable, and Bueckers was once again showing why she has become such a dangerous offensive player. She finished the night with 29 points, matching Clark's scoring total. Think about that for a moment. The two stars both finished with 29. But the game was ultimately decided by what happened after halftime. And that is where Caitlin Clark completely changed the story. Next voice, next voice. The third quarter arrived, and suddenly the game looked different. Clark found another gear. She attacked. She created. She knocked down shots, and she began putting constant pressure on Dallas. According to local coverage, Clark scored 16 of her 29 points in the third quarter alone. That is the kind of quarter that can completely change a basketball game. And that's exactly what happened. Indiana's offense became more aggressive. The Fever started finding better opportunities. And Dallas suddenly had to deal with a player who was controlling the game in multiple ways because Clark wasn't just scoring. She was creating opportunities for everyone around her. 10 assists, 29 points. And perhaps most importantly, she was influencing the game when Indiana needed it most. But here's something important. Indiana didn't win because of one player. Aaliyah Boston was outstanding in the second half as well. Boston finished with 16 points, including 10 in the second half. And that combination was crucial. When Clark creates pressure from the perimeter and Boston becomes a factor inside, defenses have a difficult choice. Focus too much on Clark, someone else gets an opportunity. Collapse toward Boston, Clark can find space. Try to defend both. That's when Indiana's ball movement becomes extremely difficult to contain. And that was one of the biggest differences in this matchup. Dallas had answers early. Indiana eventually found more answers late. The Wings had chances. They competed. They had stretches where it looked like they could make another comeback. But Indiana kept responding. Every time Dallas tried to regain momentum, the Fever had an answer. And as the fourth quarter continued, the game slowly slipped away from Dallas. The final score, Indiana Fever 98, Dallas Wings 87, an 11-point victory. But that number doesn't tell the entire story because Indiana had trailed at halftime. The Fever didn't dominate from the opening tip. They had to adjust. They had to respond, and they did. Now, let's talk about the part everyone will remember. Caitlin Clark, 29 points, 10 assists. Paige Bueckers, 29 points. That is what makes this matchup so fascinating. Neither player disappeared. Neither player had a quiet night. Both stars produced. But Clark's playmaking gave Indiana another dimension.